I live in a split-level house in a suburb. My house is on a bit of a hill and has a driveway leading up to it. My bedroom is in the basement, and because of the weird design of my house, my bedroom window, which is right above my bed, perfectly aligns with the walkway which is in front of my house. So, for example, when the mailman comes, I can see his feet and legs out of my window, but it's too close to the ground to see his face. I'm now 17, and this incident happened about 3 years ago. I typically go to bed extremely late, within the 3 to 4 a.m. range. One night, around 3 a.m., I was in the bathroom getting ready to go to bed. When I walked back into my room, I saw the shadow of a pair of legs and what looked like to be large boots through my blinds. Obviously, considering the time, I freaked out and just stood there, staring at the window. Whoever it was stayed for about 5 minutes, just standing there. Then they left. The next morning I told my parents what I'd seen, but they assured me it was a safe neighborhood, and it was probably an animal or something. They didn't believe me. So I attempted to go to bed as usual the next night, and around the same time I heard the sound of footsteps outside my window and jumped off my bed and onto the floor. Again, the pair of legs just stood there for a few minutes, but this time, whoever it was, knocked on the window. I sprinted upstairs to tell my parents, and they opened the front door, but no one was there. They sent me back to bed, telling me my mind was playing tricks on me because I was paranoid. I didn't really sleep that night at all. This same thing continued happening for about a week. Every night at the same time, this person would come, stand there for a few minutes, knock a couple of times, then leave. I never had the courage to open my blinds and actually look outside, and on the 5th or 6th night I begged my stepdad to stay up with me and wait until 3 a.m. so I could prove to him that it was happening. Of course, as these stories always go, the person didn't come that night. At the time I wasn't sure how they knew my stepdad was with me. I figured out a few months later that when standing at the right angle, you could actually see straight through my blinds into my room. I'm guessing this is how they knew. Again, I was told I was just being paranoid, and that it was probably because I watched too many scary videos on YouTube. The next night the person approached the window, and I hid behind my bed as usual. However, this time, the person crouched down so that I could see the outline of their whole body. They put their hands up to the window and started violently banging. Then they started saying something, but I couldn't make out what it was. I decided enough was enough, and I was going to call 911. I crawled back onto my bed and grabbed my phone, dialing the number. They sprinted away as soon as I started dialing. Again, now I understand that they could actually see me through the blinds. Again, I ran upstairs to my parents, this time sobbing and desperately begging them to believe me. My stepdad took a bat and went outside. He came back with a scarf which he had said was still warm. Must have belonged to the person, and they'd left it accidentally. After that I got new blinds and curtains. I never saw the person again, but I still occasionally look out my window around 3 a.m. to make sure no one is there. I have no idea whether they had bad intentions, if they were just trolling me to have fun, or if they were possibly on drugs or had some sort of mental condition. I get pretty creeped out thinking about the fact that they could see me clearly through the blinds. It makes me wonder what they saw, if they ever saw me changing or doing any other personal things. Creepy stuff. Either way, I'm glad to have never seen them again. This all started one night after finishing up a closing shift at work. I had been at my job at Bennigan's for about 4 months and was having the time of my life. I had recently finished high school and was now a freshman at a local community college. My career aspirations as a rock star subsided as I decided to study to become a history teacher. My shifts weren't that bad and I made some good money. This night I was closing up. I waited for one of my best friends to finish her closing duties, as she was my usual ride home. We spoke about our shift and our plans for the week as we drove off through the streets in a mildly cold November night. We said our goodbyes and I went into the duplex my family and I had been living in for 7 years. After walking into the building, I headed straight to the shower, as I seriously needed it. I reeked of burgers and steaks. And after this I immediately got myself ready for bed, as I knew the alarm clock is set to go off at 6:30 a.m. As I drifted off to dream of whatever my mind could concoct, that's when it started. I was dreaming away as the voices began. I was dreaming of being in a hospital waiting room, which seemed kind of odd. And ever since I could remember, I've been a vivid dreamer. My dreams were usually related to what I had experienced that day or had been daydreaming about. Why am I in a hospital, and what's with these voices I can hear? The dreams seemed to be pretty boring, as for the most part, I was sitting down in my Halloween outfit, which was a long black, long-sleeved dress, as I was an angel of death minus the wings, and was watching people in a hospital waiting room. The voices were pretty strange. I just heard mumbling and could never make out what they were saying. Why wasn't a song playing in the background as it usually is? I probably forgot to turn on my CD player. Yep, I did. Guess no Incubus or Backstreet Boys to be the soundtrack to this dream. You know what? Maybe my bladder will kick in and wake me up as it usually does. Maybe I've finally gone crazy and I'm now having conversations with myself in my sleep. I usually don't do this unless I know I am having a nightmare or really need to go to the bathroom. Was I that tired I'd reached a different level of sleep where I can't wake myself up like I normally do? What's with that light from the window? Is the sun that bright that it's causing that much of a glow in the room? I walked towards the light I was seeing and suddenly felt at ease, no longer full of worry or annoyance of my dream. As I got closer to the window, an excruciating pain overcame my body. I might have fallen off my bed, I thought to myself. Yep, I probably fell. That's what I get for sleeping on a twin-size bed. The light was suddenly gone and the annoyance hit me again. I need to wake up. I have to study for a quiz for my history class. Wait. Maybe that hit I got from my Aikido class last week triggered this delayed loss of consciousness. Mum should wake me up any minute now. I sat myself down and huffed in defeat as I continued to wait to open my eyes. I sobbed out of frustration when suddenly the voices stopped and the comfort they somewhat brought me made me feel so alone. I looked around the hospital waiting room and saw my parents. I smiled and thought, hey, if this is a dream, at least they will talk to me. I went up to them and they couldn't hear or see me. I was upset with myself and how ridiculous this dream was turning out to be. I sat myself down again and then it finally happened. My dream finally ended. But when I woke up, I was not in my room. Where the hell am I and why am I sitting on a wheelchair? Why am I in the hospital? Why the hell am I not in my room? I had so many questions and then I sadly learned the truth. Turns out I was a victim of a car crash caused by a drunk driver that killed my best friend, who I remember lastly gave me a ride home. The crash happened 4 days after that mentioned shift. That wasn't a dream I was stuck in, or voices in my head. I was in a coma, and nearly facing death. I had received pretty serious damage to my cerebellum and left part of my brain. I don't recall the days before, day of, or weeks after I awoke from my coma. The voices were people of many religions praying for me. As for the light, I was told in the first 48 hours I'd nearly slipped away. I never got to say goodbye to my best friend. And as she was buried, I struggled to stay alive. Please don't drink and drive. That way you'll save a life, yours and possibly mine. I was on a hitchhiking adventure from BC, Canada to Antigua, Guatemala, which started in September 2019. This post is taken from the notes in my journal, which I wrote as soon as I could after this insane experience. If you've ever hitchhiked before, you know how amazing it is and how many cool people you can meet. Out of the thousands of rides across 40 countries, I've only had 2 bad and/or dangerous encounters thumbing it. This was my second one. I was taking a break from travelling to find weed trim work in California's Nevada City, a beautiful little town with a very interesting crowd. But I got stuck a few towns over for not getting a ride all day. I ended up sleeping a night at the Love's gas station, which I had done plenty of times before. I've slept in worse places. At least Love's has a bathroom. In the morning I was a little more desperate to accept rides because no one was stopping and it had already been a whole day. I just wanted to get out of there. A pickup truck was speeding past me and slammed the brakes on up ahead, then slowly backed up. Inside was a man and a woman in their late 50s, and he said in a husky voice, "Where you headed, boy?" "Nevada City, any distance helps," I replied. "Well, get in. We're going to Yuba." They seemed normal enough, even without most of their teeth and hair, so I jumped in. It all happened in rapid succession. I tossed my bag in the back and jumped in, then shut the door, at which time I noticed a pile of guns and bullets on the floor. Before I had time to rethink my decision, we sped off. So as I'm trying to assess whether or not I'm in danger, they start telling me how this guy just got out of jail for aggravated assault, how he beat that motherfucker so bad he can't think straight no more, and they both laugh. She's holding his seatbelt over his chest, and they both smell really bad, and they start asking how much money I have. Now I think, yep, I'm not safe here. After hitchhiking all this way, I don't look particularly wealthy. I'm filthy, in need of a shower, and I look no different than the stereotypical homeless guy. So I tried to seem more poor than I am, and more tough than I am too. "I'm broke, man. That's why I'm going to the city. I'm hoping to make some cash trimming." The man looks me in the eye. "Well, you'll find it all right. You'll find it good. Don't be afraid to do no dirty work. If people try, and they'll try to do you do them first. You get what I'm saying? Put your eyes on the damn road, Jesus Christ." The woman points forward and he swerves back to the right lane. He asks me if I smoke, and knowing that California has legalized weed, I put 2 and 2 together. He's offering me a joint. So I say, "Yeah, I smoke." With a wild look in his eye, he exclaims, "Great." And we turn off the highway and start down a dirt road. I'm more than worried now, and I look behind us. In the back of the truck is my bag, a chainsaw, a pickaxe, and a plastic tarp over something. Seeing this didn't help my anxiety. Finally, we stop in front of a clearing. The woman takes out, not a joint, but a meth pipe. It's the first time I've seen a meth pipe, and a lot of things start to make sense. While he lights up and exhales into the car, I've never seen smoke so white. I roll down the window as fast as possible, 'cause I don't want to smoke it. The woman takes some as well, and they tell me how they were going to collect money that a woman owes them. That damn bitch is going to pay today one way or another. Damn straight. She better have the money. I'm going to grab her and say, "Where's my money, bitch?" Oh, she'll have it all right. She'll have it or else. Say, son, you ever steal something? 'Cause we could make $20,000 today. Now I don't know exactly how to answer this guy, and he repeats, $20,000 today. Here, smoke some of this, and hands me the pipe. Nothing like meth, ain't that right? I gently reject it and say that meth's not really my thing, which he surprisingly takes well and smokes some more before putting it away and driving off back towards the highway. His driving is terrible. He's swerving, speeding, hitting brakes abruptly, and starts trying to convince me to help them steal marijuana plants. You'll hold my gun and I'll drill the hole. And I'll keep a lookout. Yeah, baby girl will keep a lookout. Now you gotta be careful if you hear the dogs, because them sons of bitches are nasty. Nasty. See this bite? And he reveals what looks like a terrible scar on his arm. I didn't really know how to get out of this situation, so I sounded as confident as possible and said that I was meeting a friend to look for work together and they would be expecting me today. We neared the end of Yuba City where they pull over on the side. Well, it's your funeral. You don't want to eat? Fine by me. But if you ever want that cash, you call me, and hands me his number. Hell no, I think to myself. Thanks, I will, I say, quickly retrieving my bag and smiling nervously. The woman says goodbye with a wave. Take care now, God bless. And they sped off. I'm standing on the side of the road, thinking, what the hell was that? Happy to be out of that car. Meth heads 1 and 2, thanks for the offer to steal marijuana plants, but no thanks. After high school many years ago, I was in a bad place. My guardian had kicked me out after graduation, and she didn't help me find a place to stay, so I lived in my car for a couple of months. One day I met some heavy metal dudes at work. I had seen them around town, and all my other friends knew who they were, and everyone loved them. We became friends over a couple of months, and they offered for me to move in with them, so I agreed. Looking back now, though, I wish I had just stayed in my car. My 2 main roommates were brothers, named Andrew and Seth. They were in a band. They also believed in the occult, and anything of that sort. I never really believed in that stuff, but I'm not one to tell someone what they should believe. They had let me live with them rent-free for several months, so who was I to complain? Being the only female in the house full of young men, I was always looking over my shoulder. You never know who you can trust, and it turns out I was right to worry. Over time, their friends started to stay with us for longer periods of time, sometimes weeks. Their friends were another group of brothers that they had gone to school with. There were 5 brothers in total, but only 2 stayed with us consistently. The younger brother, Mark, was very polite. He cleaned up after himself and always helped with the household chores. The other brother, Adam, had a laundry list of mental problems. He had apparently done some bad drugs back in the day, and it had developed into what seemed like psychosis of the religious sort. He had done time in prison for assaulting a woman with a Bible. He would often look you in the eyes and tell you he could see how you would die. Once he told me that I was possessed by a demon, and I needed my soul cleansed. Everyone in the house knew he had these problems, but he was their friend, so they helped him through the hard times and gave him a place to stay. Otherwise he would be out on the streets. I was always on guard around him after the things he told me. No one else seemed to be as concerned as I was, though they should have been. One day I was sleeping and my phone rang. It was my boss. He asked if I could come into work an hour early. It was only 12 p.m. and I was broke and had nothing better to do, so I said yes. I got up and began getting ready to leave. I walked out into the living room to see Mark and Andrew sitting on the couch, while Adam sat on the floor by the TV. He was watching scripture videos on YouTube. Some real end-of-days stuff. And that was fairly common, so I went about my business. I said goodbye and left for work. And my shift at work was almost complete when the phone rang. My boss answered, handed the phone to me and said, "For you." I was just a cashier, so I assumed it was a friend that couldn't reach me on my phone. I answered the phone and heard a man's voice that I didn't recognize. "Hi, this is Detective Williams. Something happened at your apartment today and we need you to come to the station to talk about it." I left work immediately. I had assumed one of the brothers had been arrested for drug dealing or something, but I was very wrong. I got to the station and was buzzed in. An officer escorted me to a small, cold room with a camera. He gave me a bottle of water and left me by myself for about 30 minutes. My mind was racing, thinking about what could have happened. He came back in and informed me that Adam had stabbed and killed Andrew at around 1 p.m. I was shocked. I had just left the house an hour before it happened, and everything seemed fine. I asked if there had been a fight, and the detective informed me that there hadn't been a fight, and it seemed to have happened out of nowhere. I gave my statement to the police and left with nowhere to go, still in shock and confused out of my mind. Our apartment was a crime scene, so I went to another friend's house to watch the news report, since the police wouldn't give me any information on the case. Over the next couple of days, the information began to be released. Adam hadn't just stabbed Andrew once, or twice, but he had stabbed him over and over and nearly decapitated him. After the murder, he ran down the road still holding the murder weapon, and he called 911 to inform them of what he had done. I watched the news report in horror. We had known he was unstable, but this? He had fully confessed to the brutal murder and provided police with his notebooks. He had apparently been planning to murder all of his brothers, my roommates, and me. He thought we were possessed by demons, and this was the only way to free us. Luckily, none of his other intended victims was there that day. Mark unfortunately witnessed the murder, but he luckily escaped. If I hadn't gotten that call from my boss, I wouldn't be alive today. This experience took place back in the early 90s, either 1990 or 1991, but no later than 92. My dad was active duty in the military and had just been reassigned to a new job in the States. For anonymity's sake, I will only say that it was in the Midwestern United States. We were moving to there from Europe and we didn't know anybody, so we had to lease an apartment for a while. My mum didn't work and my dad was barely adjusting to his new job, so we couldn't afford to buy a house yet. I would describe the apartment building as creepy. It was a tall, singular 4-story building standing literally in the middle of nowhere and surrounded by woods. The nearest path back to civilization was half a mile to the main road. If you've ever seen the Blair Witch Project, the area itself wasn't unlike the house at the end of the movie, and the condition of the actual apartment wasn't much better. As a kid, I distinctly remember hating the drive to and from the apartment. Not so much from, but definitely to. The drive itself was long, boring, and uneventful. However, when approaching the place, I'd get a tingling sensation that lasted until I entered my flat. Night trips were the worst for it. Sometimes we'd dine out or see a late show and drive back late in the night. It always seemed like the clouds were out in an ominous, almost demonic shape at this time, and the building looked completely skeletal. Had we not been residents ourselves, I'd probably assumed it was abandoned. My first encounter with Jonathan was on a weekend. It was early on a Saturday, I believe. My first time hearing about him was the Monday morning previously, just before my mum had taken me to the bus. The landlady, building manager, was standing in the hallway having a loud argument with another woman who stood in her doorway. I was very young at the time, barely starting kindergarten, so some details might be off. The woman had said something to the landlord to the effect of, "Well, if you're not going to do something about him, then I'm leaving." It was actually more of a shout. Then the landlady replied with something like, "It's under control, go back inside." And the woman yelled back in response, almost hysterically. I remember this part vividly because it was my first time hearing the F word. "It's not under fucking control. Every time I go down there." She hesitated and stopped when she noticed us walking by. "Oh, we'll talk later, I guess." Then just like that she went back into her apartment. Mum and I smiled as we walked by the landlady, who I don't recall ever bothering me. But I do remember her looking like a generic witch, minus the green skin and pointy hat. She was old, like in her 60s or 70s, wore a windbreaker and sweatpants, and always had a cigarette either dangling from her lip or in between her fingers, about to be smoked. My mum smoked at the time, so she would often see her out in the front garden area smoking. Another important detail about this building was that despite it being 4 floors, there were exits on every floor that went to an enclosed metal stairwell that led outside. Theoretically, you could get to every floor in the building from that one stairway, including the basement, which I remember severely scaring me as a child. I had also noticed a man who I described looking like a typical hillbilly frequently enter and exit the basement via the stairwell overlook. This was Jonathan, who was either the landlord's son, nephew, or some other relation. I don't know for a fact that they were related, but I'm fairly certain they were. Jonathan lived in a small studio room built down in the basement, and apparently had done so for some time. He supposedly did repairs around the building and other odd jobs that the landlady was too old to do herself. She, by the way, had lived up in the attic that had been converted into a 5th-floor studio, and despite supposedly being his relation, lived by herself. I distinctly remember the reasoning being that she simply did not want him living with her. My dad would always joke that she looked like an old bat coming and going from her belfry. Days after school were spent either watching TV with my parents or exploring the small play area in the back of the building. There were no kids in the building save for me, so we really were cut off from society being out in the woods. I remember there being this small alley sidewalk that you could take that would eventually bring you to a suburb. Some of the older kids liked to come out and play baseball near the building. I had befriended some of them, and they would occasionally invite me to play ball, but usually I would just watch the older kids play while I built sandcastles in the play school sandbox by the building. Whenever Jonathan would make a rare appearance outside, the older kids would drop what they were doing and head for the hills, so to speak, and would often encourage me to follow suit, despite me living there. I never did find out why, and my young mind had just figured it was older kids not wanting to look uncool around an adult. Now, the weekend in question, where I had officially met Jonathan. I was riding a new bike my dad had picked up for me from a department store near base. Since I was still small and not at all experienced with riding an actual bike, it still had the training wheels on. I was practicing by myself on the sidewalk in front of the building, while my parents were doing whatever. In retrospect, they probably should have kept a better eye on me. I was riding in circles and stopped when I noticed Jonathan standing by the building entrance, just watching me. This was obviously creepy behaviour, but as a kid I had figured he was being a careful adult and making sure that I wasn't misbehaving or getting hurt. When he approached me, I stopped in my tracks. He placed his hand on my handlebars and said, "Nice bike there," he said in a very childlike, almost slurred voice. "Thanks, it's new," I replied, happy that someone was complimenting my new bike. "I have a bike too. Want to see it?" he asked, again in a very childlike manner. "Okay," I replied. What seemed like ages but was really only 2 or 3 minutes, Jonathan came from around the back of the building, riding on what I can only describe as an adult tricycle. Not like one of those large bicycles that people would ride in the early 1900s, but literally a giant tricycle. I was wowed because it's been only a short time since I was weaned off my trike, and remember still being somewhat miffed that I was forced to hand it down to my baby cousin before the move to the States. "Want to ride it?" he asked. "I'd love to," I chirped. I climbed on to ride it, but found that my feet barely reached the pedals. Jonathan had laughed this weird, almost girlish laugh, because apparently this was funny to him. I was uneasy at that point and wanted off, but I remember suddenly being scared of the height difference. I was a dumb kid and didn't know it was only a few inches off the ground, and was afraid of falling off. Jonathan kept laughing that creepy girly laugh, and I honestly wasn't in the mood for laughing. I was having a horrible time and wanted off, and I remember frantically asking him to help me get down from the tricycle. He obliged, walked over, placed 2 hands on my sides, lifted me up and placed me back on the ground. "Thanks," I exclaimed before taking my bike and hauling ass back into the building. That was my first confirmed creepy experience with Jonathan, and I remember seeing over my shoulder that he stood, motionless, watching me as I ran away. I was much too young to know or even understand what a handicapped or mentally challenged person was, and my mum had told me later that Jonathan was mentally impaired. I remember the next morning it was a Sunday, because I think the Super Mario Brothers cartoon came on, or it was repeated. Either way, I remember eating a bowl of honeycomb cereal and rushing to go outside to play, but my dad had literally stopped me by grabbing me, hoisting me up and bringing me back into the apartment. I was upset because it was an unusually sunny and nice day in October, and I wanted to enjoy it before it got dark again. My dad had some work to do in town, at a workmate's house I think, while my mum was taking our laundry to a 24-hour to wash and dry everything, and I was to go with her. The building wasn't rigged with individual washer and dryer units, and didn't even have a laundry room. In fact, the only unit in existence was down in the basement, near Jonathan's room, but I never recall us ever going down there, just that the red exit sign above the darkened basement doorway looked foreboding, and had always scared me. On the drive out to the complex, I did notice the landlady and the hysterical neighbour woman out front, standing by what looked like to be a sheet, which at the time I didn't know what it was. A Halloween prop? But now I know that there was a dead dog laying beneath it. There had been dead animals cropping up all over the property, and while many of them had been strays or wild animals, some of them did belong to the tenants. The next day I had seen a white moving truck parked out in the parking lot, and the hysterical woman was completely gone from the building the next day after that. Can an entire building itself be the subject of a let's not meet? Jonathan and the landlady were creepy for sure, but the building itself is what scared me the most. I would have reoccurring dreams about waking up to be surrounded by darkness, the only illumination being a red exit sign, the very sign in the basement, which would always result in me waking up crying and screaming, and my parents rushing in with the lights on to see what was wrong. This series of night terrors became commonplace up until the day we moved out, which fortunately was only a few weeks later. My dad had apparently broken his lease to get us out early, because he had found an ideal house for rent in a nice suburb that was close to my school, a park, neighbours and civilization. Basically, it was heaven compared to where we were living. The landlady was pissed, and she had charged my dad a $50 fee on top of the next month's rent for breaking the lease, but that didn't matter. We were gone. I never did learn for sure whether the dead animals were Jonathan's doing, because it could have easily been the result of a wild animal attack, or some dickhead hunters playing around with a rifle. We didn't exactly live out in the country, but it wasn't unheard of to get reports of bears, mountain lions and other predatory animals coming down from the hills and deeper in the woods to prey on the domesticated pets. However, the neighbour woman who had been arguing with the landlady seemed extremely distraught when we had caught her swearing, and her eyes were red as though she'd been crying, and that day I saw them standing by what I believe was a dead dog under a sheet. She looked like she had absolutely lost it. 100-yard stare and looking motionless at the sheet, while the landlady puffed away at a cigarette, and called who I assume was animal control on her cordless house phone. Jonathan was very weird and obviously creepy, and even though I was not harmed by him or even had that many encounters with him, I knew from the reactions of the older boys and my own feelings of discomfort that something was wrong. I don't think it's a stretch to assume that the incidents with the dead animals and Jonathan were connected, and that is what the neighbour woman was upset about. She had known Jonathan was doing bad, and for whatever reason, his landlady, relative, was keen to just shut the conversation down. When I had turned 10, a few years later, I had learned from my mum that Jonathan had been apparently paying kids around the area pogs in order to go with him to the work shed to play doctor. This lines up perfectly with the reactions of the older kids, the woman neighbour who ultimately moved, and my own sinking suspicions. I know I had said that it was the building itself that creeped me out the most. However, I think my youthful ignorance, naivety, and general assumption that everyone was well-meaning had misplaced my fears to the building and blinded me to the fact that Jonathan was actually the source of my discomfort. I'm not aware that he ever actually did anything to those kids, but let's just hope for their sake that he didn't, and hopefully finally received proper diagnosis and treatment for his condition. Okay, so I didn't put this in my earlier post, Strange Things in the Desert, because I didn't think anyone would believe this, but my son told me I should share it nevertheless, so here it is. It happened about 26 years ago. My friend Jack and I were driving an RV, pulling an old truck bed conversion trailer to Yucca Valley, as he made a deal with a friend of ours to trade his RV for a running truck. We were driving on old Highway 247, where there was nothing but just flat sand and an occasional rock formation. I remember we passed a rolling sandhill overlooking winding roads of nothing, and it was dark as we'd gotten a late start. I was laying on the side couch trying to take a nap, when he called out for me to come up front and look at what he was seeing. What we could see were what looked like little balls of red fire darting past each other and going up and down about a mile ahead of us, and they seemed to be coming in our direction. As they got closer, we noticed that about 4 of them were bunched together, forming into one, then 4 more joined them. Jack slowed down, and we were hoping they would go away, but they didn't. I opened the window, but we heard no sound, and they just seemed to hover. Jack thought to heck with it, and started driving faster. That's when they all dispersed and flew towards a nearby rock hill. Jack floored it as we were definitely freaked out. As we were driving, we heard a bang from the back of the RV, so I ran back there, trying to keep my balance because Jack was driving like a bat out of hell, and when I looked out the back window, I saw the trailer with something sparking in the middle of it. I turned my head to tell him, but by the time I turned back, there were flames right where the sparks were. At this time, the red lights were just gone. Jack pulled over and grabbed the small fire extinguisher by the stove, and we stood by the door, but were too scared to go outside. With a few exhales, he puffed up his chest and swung open the door. Then we ran out of the trailer. I had a big flashlight, and I trailed behind him. The flames were getting pretty big, lighting up the desert around us. It took a while to put it out, as at the same time we were cautiously looking above and around us. Jack jumped in the trailer to see what had caught it on fire, but all he found were shards of pointed metallic pieces strewn around and a dent in the bottom of the trailer bed. I jumped in the trailer because I didn't want to be standing on the ground alone, when just then we heard something about 40 feet behind us on the passenger side. I shined my light, but we couldn't see anything. It was quiet, with not a car or light in sight. Then we heard it again. It sounded like gravel, like when you scrape your shoe on dry dirt, but it was much closer. At that moment, Jack thought he saw something, so he took the flashlight, and I, of course, was holding on to him so close that I could feel his heart thump through his ribs. He turned the light over where we heard the noise, and it looked like around 5 piles of sand, like little mounds in a row. Then the noise stopped. He asked me what I thought was going on, and I hadn't a clue. We started to jump out of the trailer when we heard it again. Jack beamed the light and caught the flash of some reflective diamond-shaped eyes that quickly disappeared. Then those sandy dirt mounds started moving towards us all at the same time, as if something small was pushing them from behind. Jack grabbed me and we jumped and ran towards the RV door. I don't think either of us had ever run that fast. He put the RV in drive and we sped off, hearing things hitting the back like rocks being thrown, but we didn't stop. We were constantly looking around us and I stayed right next to him. By the time we got to a small town, the RV was sputtering, and Jack didn't understand why. It was in perfect shape before we left, so we pulled over to check the engine under a streetlight, and he took a walk around and saw that the hot tailpipe had been curled up, folded up, facing the back of the bumper. When he looked up, he saw all of the back window screens were shredded, and the rubber around the glass was hanging. He took some tools and some gloves and straightened the pipe, and we drove a bit longer to our friend's house. We told our friend what had happened, but he didn't believe us. The next day when we woke up, our friend came in asking us what the hell we'd done to the RV. So when we looked at it, it looked like the glass was all etched with scratches up where the screens were shredded. We had no explanation as to what could have cut glass like that, and there were dents on top and in the back. In one spot on the siding, there was what looked like an impression of 5 little fingers with nail holes at the end of them and a wide thumb. Needless to say, Jack had to put our friend for the damage. Needless to say, Jack had to pay our friend for the damage to the RV, and we took his new truck and drove the long way back home. We never talked about it to anyone else again. He kept a few of those metallic shards that we'd found. He said when he held it, it felt soft, but when he'd accidentally dropped it, it turned sharp and hard again. He told me that he had to get rid of them because the more he handled them, the more he noticed his hands start to blister, and he didn't want his kids getting hold of them. I kick myself now because if I had known back then it was so significant, I would have asked him to let me keep them. 5 years ago during the daytime, and I was driving with my son in my small truck. We were following my ex in his car, and we ended up in that same spot from that night. It didn't dawn on me we were going that way, until I started to hyperventilate, and my son had to calm me down. You see, it was times like this that made me hate the desert. It's been about a year since this happened. Originally, I only talked about it to friends and on my small Twitter because I didn't know if we were going to file a police report, but there was just nothing that could be done, which I think is the most frustrating part about this. It's summer of 2019. I'm living at my parents' home with my 2 brothers and my 2 dogs. I'd say on the whole it's a pretty sweet setup. I work in my mum's small business to help her build it. We've lived in this house since 2010, and as I'm the oldest, I got the biggest, coolest room. It's a cross between a loft and a second floor. My mum has one side of it as her office space, and the other part of it is my bedroom and the gaming area where my friends come over and we play D&D. The key thing of note is that my room is the only one without a door. You can hear everything going on in the house from it. The stairs up to it are right beside the garage door. It's also equipped with a Juliet's balcony that faces the front door, so again, you can hear everything going on inside the house. Most of the time it's an annoyance, since I get spooked when my brothers are just sneaking out to grab a soda at 3 in the morning. But this night though in particular, that was not what I heard. I'd gone to bed at around 1 in the morning, which isn't unusual, as I'm in my early 20s. What was unusual, however, was me waking up and hearing a noise from downstairs that was loud enough to wake me up at around 5 in the morning. I got up feeling spooked, as my dogs were in my parents' room, so it wasn't them, and no one else was awake yet. But I went downstairs to check what it was anyway. My initial thought was that it was one of my brothers, as sometimes they were both up at this time. I went downstairs tiptoeing around in my PJ bottoms and walked in the dark kitchen. There were no signs that anything had been disturbed, even by my brothers. I say this as both of them are afraid of the dark and bad at turning off lights. The door to the garage was locked, but I hadn't locked it the night before, and perhaps Dad had forgotten to. The back door was locked. Okay, I thought. I could feel a breeze through the house, and that was strange. Usually, even though my doors upstairs creaked if we had windows open, the windows weren't open right now, as we had the AC on, I thought. Or at least I hoped we did, since Dad would kill me if the AC was off downstairs and I was overworking the house. I walked into the living area to check the thermostat, and I paused as I finally found the one piece of our house that had been disturbed. Our front door was standing wide open. What I had heard had maybe been the door banging against the wooden table beside the entryway. That's what makes me go wake up my parents in a hurry. I touched nothing. I just walked over and knocked on their door as I walk in, saying that the front door is open in a hissed whisper. My dad gets up and comes out with me. He has me do a quick sweep of the house with him. We see the boys are both asleep in their beds, but wake them up to confirm it wasn't them and freak them out in the process. We also took the youngest dog downstairs into the basement to look around and make sure no one was in there. I checked out the garage as well, as our neighbourhood has experienced break-ins before, cars being stolen out of the garages, etc. The small garage door on the side of the house was also open, and there was a huge mess in between the cars. A bunch of packing material, like boxes, had fallen over and been disturbed, as though someone had been moving through the garage quickly and had knocked it over. Another potential thing I could have heard. At this point we called the police. After searching, there was no one in the house. We'd gone through it with a fine-tooth comb, myself, Dad and the dog, and then again with Dad and the dog. Nothing had been stolen. We had all our car keys, the electronics weren't touched, and the wallets left in their places. We called to report it, but no one came out, since, well, nothing was gone. The only things disturbed were the doors. What sticks with me now, though, is that my dad confirmed that he'd been up at 4 in the morning, doing a little nightly check of the house when he couldn't sleep. He'd seen that the front door had been closed and locked even. He always checks to make sure the front door is locked, and he turns off the lights at the same time. Whoever had been in the house had been inside for less than an hour, hadn't stolen anything, and hadn't woken anyone up, but had left the 2 doors they'd used open. Someone had been inside my home, inside with all of us, and just walked through and left. I always make sure the garage door is locked now before I go to bed, but I can't help but feel violated on such a deep level. What was whoever it was doing inside the house? What was your intention, and why didn't you go through with it? My mum's purse was right beside the door, with her phone, her keys, and wallet all inside. Why walk through my entire house and not take anything? I don't think I want to know, but I sure as hell think about it, especially as I find myself sitting in my bed at night, almost a year later. Several years ago, when I was maybe 19 or 20, we lived in the state's capital. Some family friends were coming to visit us during that summer, and my mum wanted to cook a particular dish for them. The particular dish she was preparing is best served the next day, so the flavours have time to develop. However, we needed chorizo sausage to make the dish, something my mum forgot about until 7 p.m. that night. As this was in the Midwest, chorizo was hard to come by, so a quick Google search revealed a small butcher shop close to our state capitol building. Mum called and they said that they had some. Dad volunteered to go get it, and I agreed to go along because I was bored. We got into our nice Cadillac Escalade, this is important to note, plugged the directions into our GPS and drove down to the butcher's. While we were maybe 100 yards away from our state's capitol building, which is actually pretty nice, the neighbourhood this butcher shop was in was not nice at all. The street lights were out, windows were dark, Houses had peeling paint. Some were boarded up, and there were no cars in sight or anyone else around, not even walking their dogs. Something about this place gave me a weird vibe, and I mentioned to Dad that we should get the hell out of there. But we had a mission, and good luck trying to convince Dad to change his mind about something. We go into this butcher shop, and I don't know how in the world they managed to run without a visit from the health inspector. But holy cow, was it bad. It was hot and sticky inside, and I didn't hear any humming from the display cases, meaning the cooling elements weren't working. Inside the grimy display case were pork trotters, pig's ears and pork belly, and flies were buzzing around. The floors hadn't been mopped or even swept in God knows how long. And how do I know this? Because we were leaving shoe imprints, and our shoe prints were the only ones there. As I pretended to busy myself by browsing the shelves, in reality I was scanning the store and watching the exit for trouble because I did not feel right being there. Dad asked the husband and wife manning the counter about the chorizo, to which they responded that they had sold out of the last of it, but they had plenty of fresh ingredients to make their own for the right price. As Dad was trying to get his way out of their haggling and asking for directions for the closest grocery store, I noticed movement outside the smudged and smeared glass door. There were 4 burly-looking shadows outside close to our car, which wasn't just the only car out there, but it was a beautiful Escalade with all the bells, whistles, and had just been detailed. In other words, we were a giant bullseye. Thinking fast, I pretended to look at my phone. "Hey Dad, Mum asked Louisa and she had plenty of chorizo," I said, a bit more cheerily than I intended. Before Dad could ask what the heck was going on, I grabbed his arm and tugged on him. After a quick thank you, we got out of there. Fortunately, the burly shapes were gone. My knees had turned to jelly and I was still on the adrenaline high. Dad was looking at me confused. "Hey, we don't even know a Louisa," he said as he unlocked the car door. "I know, I just wanted to get out of there because I had a bad feeling," I admitted as we both got in, locked the doors and turned on the ignition. The car's headlights turned on, and not even 10 feet away were the 4 burly shapes. They were just standing there. They were 4 men, middle-aged, dressed in jeans, t-shirts and caps. I noticed one of them was holding a crowbar, and they started walking towards us. I screamed, "Dad, get out of here!" He didn't need to be told twice. Dad gunned it, and the Escalade, which is built for not only beauty but speed, accelerated. The men jumped out of the way and we took off down the road, and we didn't stop until we were home. Mum was more than glad we were okay than about the chorizo, especially when she learned what had happened. Fortunately, we were able to find some the next day at a reputable supermarket that specialized in Latino food. Hey fearsome friends, thanks for listening. Please make sure you subscribe and click that notification button so you can be aware of my videos when they upload. If you have a story that you'd like to hear me record, then please send it to my subreddit rmissfearsome83, or alternatively email me at missfearsome83@hotmail.com. If you'd also like to support me further, please go to my Patreon, where you can join for as little as $1 a month, where you'll get early access to all my recordings, and they will also be available as MP3 downloads. I also have some great merch on the Teespring website. All links are in the description below. Stay safe, stay happy, and remember, keep being creepy.